The Talking Fish. Part 3, Chinese Folk Tale. Many hours passed by until at last Li was compelled to admit that, although he was not tired, he was certainly hungry. How to get something to eat? Oh! Why had he not asked the friendly nephew a few simple questions? How easily his lordship might have told him the way to get a good breakfast, but alas, without such advice, it would be a whale's task to accomplish it. Hither and thither he swam, into the deep still water, and along the muddy shore, down to the pebbly bottom, always looking for a tempting worm. He dived into the weeds and rushes, poked his nose among the lily pads, all for nothing, no fly or worm of any kind to gladden his eager eyes. Another hour passed slowly away, and all the time his hunger was growing greater and greater. Would the fish god, the mighty dragon, not grant him even one little morsel to satisfy his aching stomach, especially since, now that he was a fish, he had no way of tightening up his belt, as hungry soldiers do when they are on a forced march. Just as Li was beginning to think he could not wriggle his tail an instant longer, and that soon, very soon, he would feel himself slipping down to the bottom of the pond to die at that very moment, chancing to look up, he saw, oh joy, a delicious red worm dangling a few inches above his nose. The sight gave new strength to his weary fins and tail. Another minute, and he would have had the delicate morsel in his mouth, when alas, he chanced to recall the advice given him the day before by great King Carp: no matter how tempting it looks, there are sure to be horrible hooks inside. For an instant Li hesitated. The worm floated a trifle nearer to his half-open mouth. How tempting! After all, what was a hook to a fish when he was dying? Why be a coward? Perhaps this worm was an exception to the rule, or perhaps anything really a fish in such a plight as Mr. Li could not be expected to follow advice, even the advice of a real king. Pop! He had it in his mouth. Oh, soft morsel, worthy of a king's desire. Now he could laugh at words of wisdom, and eat whatever came before his eye. But ugh! What was that strange feeling that ouch? It was the fatal hook. With one frantic jerk, and 100 twists and turns, poor Li sought to pull away from the cruel barb that stuck so fast in the roof of his mouth. It was now too late to wish he had kept away from temptation. Better far to have starved at the bottom of the cool pond than to be jerked out by some miserable fisherman to the light and sunshine of the busy world. Nearer and nearer he approached the surface. The more he struggled, the sharper grew the cruel barb. Then, with one final splash, he found himself dangling in midair, swinging helplessly at the end of a long line. With a chunk he fell into a flat-bottomed boat, directly on top of several smaller fish. Ah, a carp! Shouted a well-known voice gleefully, the biggest fish I've caught these 3 moons. What good luck! It was the voice of old Chang, the fisherman, who had been supplying Mr. Li's table ever since that official's arrival in the village of everlasting happiness. Only a word of explanation, and he, Li, would be free once more to swim about where he willed, and then there should be no more barbs for him. An escaped fish fears the hook. I say, Chang, he began, gasping for breath, really now, you must chuck me overboard at once, for, don't you see, I am Mr. Li, your old master. Come, hurry up about it. I'll excuse you this time for your mistake, for, of course, you had no way of knowing. Quick! But Chang, with a savage jerk, pulled the hook from Li's mouth, and looked idly towards the pile of glistening fish, gloating over his catch, and wondering how much money he could demand for it. He had heard nothing of Mr. Li's remarks, for Chang had been deaf since childhood. Quick, quick, I am dying for air, moaned poor Li, and then, with a groan, he remembered the fisherman's affliction. By this time they had arrived at the shore, and Li, in company with his fellow victims, found himself suddenly thrown into a wicker basket. Oh, the horrors of that journey on land! Only a tiny bit of water remained in the closely woven thing. It was all he could do to breathe. Joy of joys! At the door of his own house he saw his good friend Sing just coming out. Hey, Sing, he shouted, at the top of his voice, help, help, this son of a turtle wants to murder me. He has me in here with these fish, and doesn't seem to know that I am Li, his master. Kindly order him to take me to the lake and throw me in, for it's cool there and I like the water life much better than that on land." Li paused to hear Sing's reply, but there came not a single word. "I beg your honor to have a look at my catch," said old Chang to Sing. "Here is the finest fish of the season. I have brought him here so that you and my honored master, Mr. Li, may have a treat. Carp is his favorite delicacy." "Very kind of you, my good Chang, I'm sure, but I fear poor Mr. Li will not eat fish for some time. He has a bad attack of fever." "There's where you're wrong," shouted Li, from his basket, flopping about with all his might, to attract attention. "I'm going to die of a chill. Can't you recognize your old friend? Help me out of this trouble and you may have all my money for your pains." "Hey, what's that?" questioned Sing, attracted, as usual, by the word money. Shades of Confucius, it sounds as if the carp were talking. "What, a talking fish?" laughed Chang. "Why, master, I've lived nigh on to 60 year, and such a fish has never come under my sight. There are talking birds and talking beasts for that matter, but talking fish, who ever heard of such a wonder? No, I think your ears must have deceived you, but this carp will surely cause talk when I get him into the kitchen. I'm sure the cook has never seen his like. Oh, master, I hope you will be hungry when you sit down to this fish. What a pity Mr. Li couldn't help you to devour it." "Help to devour myself, eh?" grumbled poor Li, now almost dead for lack of water. "You must take me for a cannibal, or some other sort of savage." Old Chang had now gone round the house to the servants' quarters, and, after calling out the cook, held up poor Li by the tail for the chef to inspect. With a mighty jerk Li tore himself away and fell at the feet of his faithful cook. Save me, he cried out in despair. "This miserable Chang is deaf and doesn't know that I am Mr. Li, his master. My fish voice is not strong enough for his hearing. Only take me back to the pond and set me free. You shall have a pension for life, wear good clothes and eat good food, all the rest of your days. Only hear me and obey. Listen, my dear cook, listen." "The thing seems to be talking," muttered the cook, "but such wonders cannot be. Only ignorant old women or foreigners would believe that a fish could talk." And seizing his former master by the tail, he swung him onto a table, picked up a knife, and began to whet it on a stone. "Oh, oh, oh!" screamed Li, "you will stick a knife into me, you will scrape off my beautiful shiny scales, you will whack off my lovely new fins, you will murder your old master." "Well, you won't talk much longer," growled the cook, "I'll show you a trick or two with the blade." So saying, with a gigantic thrust, he plunged the knife deep into the body of the trembling victim. With a shrill cry of horror and despair, Mr. Li awoke from the deep sleep into which he had fallen. His fever was gone, but he found himself trembling with fear at thought of the terrible death that had come to him in dreamland. "Thanks be to Buddha, I am not a fish," he cried out joyfully, "and now I shall be well enough to enjoy the feast to which Mr. Sing has bidden guests for tomorrow. But alas, now that I can eat the old fisherman's prize carp, it has changed back into myself. If only the good of our dreams came true. I shouldn't mind dreaming the whole day through." The end.